Hi, my name is John. I'm introducing Google. And Google's a very large corporation that really needs little introduction because the past decade they've become very popular with their online search engine and also their wide variety of viral media. And when our subgroup went into Google, we met with an employee named Laurel Coniglio, and she really gave us insight into what the company's all about. Now we're going to look at the company's organizational structure, and this includes socialization, formal and informal structure. Socialization is just like really community building and building relationships within the company, like with the employees. And this is very well done by Google by installing in each headquarters game rooms. This includes a pool table, a rock wall, all that other fun stuff, actually even razor scooters. And they also have an all-you-can-eat lunch and dinner buffet. And as far as formal and informal structures goes, this is best exemplified by Google's ethics training. There's the formal ethics training, which includes the chain of command, who to report to if there's any ethical misconduct. But they really rely on their informal structure, which is the employees communicating and them knowing what to do and what not to do. Google's informal corporate motto is "Don't be evil," and this is created by Paul Buchheit, who made Gmail. And this is like just it completely embodies each of their buildings and structures. And I'll go into the next slide. But if you look at this slide right here, you can see a bunch of pictures of how really their organizational culture embodies the whole entire company. But now I'm going to pass it off to Chris, who's going to talk about Google CSR.
Hi, as John said, my name's Chris. I'm going to talk about something that John actually touched on earlier, which is Google's unofficial corporate motto, "Don't be evil." And we're going to look at basically how Google applies this to its everyday life and its relations to the community and organizations. Now, one of the things you do whenever you meet a person or you're trying to judge someone ethically is you see how they treat others. As we learned earlier in the course, the golden rule is one of the main things. Treat others as you treat yourself, and it's under virtuous ethics. And basically, it shows you what kind of person someone is, if they're a giving person, if they're kind to other people. And one of the things you can actually do is apply a person's individual ethics to that of a corporation. You simply make the corporation to be that of one individual person. So we're going to do that by looking at Google's social responsibility and also Google's employee engagement to basically see how Google treats the community around it and its employees. So for Google's social responsibility, the big thing for that is google.org. It's Google's philanthropic arm, who basically have all these donations on the site. It's responsible for contributing over $1 billion per year in in-kind support, which is basically any support that's not actually charitable giving. So computers, technology, food, shelter, and all those kind of things. And they're also responsible for $185 million in donations in money to certain charities. So it's also one of the big things it's known for is called the disease trends. And Google found that if you look at the number of people who Google certain topics, such as flu medicines or just medicines in general, you can actually find where disease outbreaks are happening in the world. For example, say take Venezuela. If Google saw in Venezuela that the topic of flu medicines was trending for that day, Google actually found there's a correlation between that topic and the fact that there's a flu outbreak within Venezuela. And that usually comes out almost faster than the medical community can react. So then Google uses this advanced warning to alert the right people and to then put money towards helping that the outbreak and stopping from spreading. And they can see as it spreads farther and farther, different country to country. Another big thing that they have is how when they helped survivors when they helped the tsunami survivors in Japan, they were able to use Google Maps to map out the damaged areas, where the radiation was coming from. And they basically put it into all of this one big map where they showed zones that were safe and zones that were not safe, where the workers need to focus their efforts, where they need to concentrate it. And then the Japanese government was able to disseminate that to everyone in the rescue effort and all the citizens, so they were able to use that for their own safety and to better help people. A big thing that Google does is it encourages employees to contribute to charities and donate their time and money. So to encourage this, Google actually provides charity matching. So anything you donate as a Google employee to charity, Google will match 100% of the money you donate. And for every 5 hours you work for a charity or organization that you donate your time, Google will contribute $50 to that charity or organization. Google employees actually have contributed over 40,000 hours per year on average. And this is also due to the fact that during the entire month of June, Google encourages all of its employees to go out and give, and whether it's cleaning the street, cleaning graffiti, teaching prisoners is one of the things they mentioned on their site. They encourage all their employees to take a day, which they pay for, to go out and do good in that community. Which leads to the idea of ethics in the community. As we talked about in class, basically companies are citizens of their communities, and they have a responsibility to the communities they're in. Google happens to be, a citizen of the global community as a whole. So Google's responsibility not only extends to just Americans, it extends to Europeans, Asians, Africans, basically everyone out there. One of the main examples of this I'm going to look at, and Daniel's actually going to show a negative of this later on in his speech, is Google in China. When Google went into China, they censored everything. They forced Google to censor searches such as Tiananmen Square, the Dalai Lama, and basically Chinese citizens couldn't find those things online. And Google was against this, but they were making $250 million per year off of China, so they decided that even though it was against their ethics, they would keep going with it. And at the end of the day, in 2010, there was a widespread hacking of Gmail accounts of Chinese dissidents, and Google then actually traced that back to the Chinese government. Now the Chinese government was hacking these accounts to wipe them out, and to also find where these dissidents were and their real names so that they could silence them and stop them from speaking out for free speech. Google took this as the last straw and basically just pulled out of China to Hong Kong, and because of the treaty between China and Hong Kong doesn't have to respond to any of the some of the censoring rules imposed by China. However, as any ethical issue that we learned in class, there's always two sides to the issue. And Daniel was actually talking about the negative impacts it had on many of the citizens of China. And you can move on to the next slide. All right, if you look at the flip side of that coin is employee engagement, which is basically we looked at how Google treats those citizens as a whole, but how does it treat its own employees? Because if you treat your employees bad, it doesn't really matter what you do for the community, you're still probably not a very ethical company. But Google actually is good with that. They have very engaged employees. They're known for that. The cost of disengagement to the U.S. is almost $300 billion per year. And so Google, obviously, it's in Google's best interest to keep their employees engaged. So we're going to look at basically the engagement continuum, which is a concept we learned in class. First, you have employees who are actively disengaged, and those are the ones who they take all the sick days they can have. They skip work. They come in late all the time. They're a negative drag on the culture, and they're the people who are basically bringing the company down. If someone goes to them and says, "I need help. With my project, want to help me out," that employee would say no. They're the ones who really contribute the worst to bringing a company down and bringing productivity of a company down. The middle ground is the non-engaged employees. They're the ones who maybe they show up 9 to 5. But they show up at 9 o'clock, and at 4:59, they're up and out the door, ready to leave. So those ones aren't necessarily a horribly negative drag on the social culture and the productivity as a whole, but they're not really the great employees you want. They're not the ones staying late or working on actual projects on their own. But what Google is known for is its engaged employees. As John talked about earlier, Google offers so many services to employees to make them want to come to work every day. Things such as, they have pool tables, they have arcade rooms, they have a nap room because they encourage napping for creativity. And engaged employees are passionate, enthusiastic, feel profoundly connected to the company, drive innovation, move the company forward, and they're the ones who go the extra mile. They're the ones that work 9 to 9 every night because they love their work so much. And that's what Google really tries to do. So if you look at this, even though Google has some ethical issues, for the most part, they treat the community around them well, and they treat their own employees well. So you could say that they really seem to try to stick to that idea of don't be evil. But now I'm going to pass it on to Daniel, who's going to look at Google and ethical awareness.
Hi, as Chris said, I'm Dan, and I'll be looking into ethical awareness. And from our interview, we determined that throughout Google, they had a high level of ethical awareness from employee to employee throughout the offices. Each employee has to complete module quizzes before they can even be considered a part of the Google team. These are quizzes that last up to a couple hours, and it's just strictly on ethics and the procedures on which you have to complete your ethics training. And the high ethical awareness leads to an internal locus of control, which means you feel like you have high control over what's going on ethically. If you run into an ethical dilemma, you want to take action in your responsibilities. You want to report that ethical dilemma to your immediate manager, and you want to take care of it before it spreads. And just looking at the other firms that we're working with, Google and Bernstein Law for stages of development are in the post-conventional level, while we determined Schneider Downs is still in the conventional level. Bernstein and Google are just a little more developed ethically, and that leads to a higher ranking in the stages of development. You can move on to the next slide. So changes we would make if we were Google employees, as I was saying, they have great ethical practices in the office, but from employee to employee. But every large firm with that many members is going to run into some ethical issues, and I'm just going to briefly touch on what Chris was saying earlier. Just the negative side of Google moving to China. They went public in 2004, and they went international, and when they moved to China, they couldn't keep up with the privacy issues and the certain requirements you have to meet to run an internet site in China. So they just moved to Hong Kong. They kind of took the easy way out. Moving to Hong Kong cut off billions of Chinese population. Only members of Hong Kong could access Google, and that cut off a lot of Chinese people. And just for the privacy issues, they have been in a couple lawsuits when taking pictures of houses for Google Maps and stuff like that. So they need to work on their timing with issues like that. And my suggestion is just increase your ethical awareness in the general market. You got to know where you're working. You want to have your ethical awareness as high as it is publicly as it is throughout the office. And you can move on to the next slide. And just to wrap up Google here, just our most important takeaway, the biggest thing we learned, is just with a firm as large as Google, it's easy to cross the line. When it pertaining to ethical or unethical, there's sometimes that line was fine and sometimes it's undefined. And with a firm that large, it can easily be undefined, and your practices could easily go from ethical to unethical. I'm going to hand it off to Chris to wrap up our presentation.
Alright, basically in conclusion to this entire presentation, we have a graph here which basically shows all the things the teams have gone through and are comparing and contrasting. We looked at the hiring process, the ethical culture, the ethical awareness, and the overall ethics. And they're obviously color-coded, and we ranked from the highest to lowest. In the hiring process, we saw that Schneider Downs was the best. Ethical culture, we gave it to Bernstein Law Firm. Ethical awareness, Google and Schneider Downs tied. And for overall, we decided that Google would be the highest ethical awareness, with Schneider Downs being second and Bernstein Law Firm being third. Basically, the big takeaway from this is that companies such as Google, who are so large and have good ethics policies, the fact that they're multinational just creates a large problem in the modern world, as whose ethics do you follow, all the complications of working in over 100 different countries, and all the different ethical guidelines each of those countries would have. It creates large issues that even if you're trying to be an ethically aware company, sometimes it's really hard to do that. But such small firms like Bernstein Law, they can get away with ethical slips easy because they don't really draw public attention. And if one of their employees decides to go and break the ethical code or do something unethical, you have this big issue that that there's really no one to catch them there because their strict ethical guidelines aren't in place. And basically that's it for our presentation. This is Team 5, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something.